exploring Uganda's competitiveness in regional agricultural trade. We have here at the National Planning Authority a full house. I will ask colleagues later to introduce themselves, and we have a very packed program. But before we start the meeting, I will ask Ambassador Phil Pedro to lead us in an opening prayer. And then after that, we will have welcome remarks from the Executive Director of the National Planning Authority, Dr. Joseph Mubawala, and also the Chairperson of Uganda Agribusiness Alliance, Honorable Victoria Sechole. Ambassador Idro, please lead us in a quick prayer, then we commence our proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. I think let's humble ourselves in the face of the Lord. Lord God, we thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to come together to discuss issues of your people on earth with special reference to agriculture. Lord God, we know you are with us right now and guiding us in our thoughts, in our words, and in our future plans. And we know very well that you have been doing this ever since and continuing to do so. And for that, we thank you. We ask you today for the grace so that we have all the sense and all the wisdom again in trying to find answers to these questions that are put before us. And we do this for your people. And therefore, we ask you to guide us through Christ our Lord in making sure that we discover the truth of the matter. We do this in your name.
Amen. Thank you, Ambassador Idro. Our agenda goes like this. For about 15 minutes or less, we will have welcome and opening remarks made by Dr. Joseph Mubawala, the Executive Director of National Planning Authority, and Honorable Victoria Sechole, the Chairperson of Uganda Agribusiness Alliance. After the welcome remarks, which will be quick, we will have a presentation on the reflections on Uganda's agricultural trade competitiveness, which brings together three studies that were done across the region on the subject of competitiveness of agricultural trade. And this will be done by Ms. Rachel Kemgisha, Director, Regional Policy and Regulatory Environment, Feed the Future East Africa Market Systems Program. After that, we will go into the real dialogue, the public-private sector dialogue, challenges, opportunities for Uganda's regional trade competitiveness. I will lead the dialogue, but of course, we will first of all start with the people in the room, and then I can pick on some of the colleagues who are online, so you can give us what you feel, what resonates with you and what doesn't. Then that dialogue will lead us into the way forward. The way forward will be facilitated by Dr. Suman Guloba, the Director, Development Planning and National Planning Authority. I want to stress that this is not a talking shop. This is a real policy dialogue housed by the planners of this country, particularly for the agro-industrialization program, which, while the country is going to produce heavily, we are still worried about where the market is going to come from. But I will not preempt the presentations. I want to use this opportunity to invite Dr. Joseph Mubawala to make his remarks. Dr. Mubawala.
I thank you, Moderator. I am going to have to remove my mask. I'm not a threat to anybody. For purposes of ensuring that we are audible enough, let me take this opportunity to welcome you all to the National Planning Authority and to thank you for trusting us to lead this dialogue. It is one thing to have a mandate, and it is another to implement that mandate. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, it is with great pleasure and honor to address this very important public-private partnership dialogue where we sit to discuss and review Uganda's competitiveness in the regional agriculture trade. And while I have a prepared statement, I am going to make it so quick to ensure that we don't waste a lot of time in pleasantries, that we delve into the most important issues. Okay. In line with the National Development Plan, whose goal is to have an increased household income and improved life of all Ugandans, and the theme, which is sustainable industrialization for inclusive growth, employment, and wealth creation, we find this dialogue very important to our achievement or attempted achievement of arriving at this goal. We want to thank you, the moderator, and Ambassador Phil Pedro, and the colleagues all here present. And I'm hoping that Minister of Agriculture is also here. Yes, thank you. And at the same time, that Minister of Trade is also here. Or they are somewhere online. Am I right?
Yes, online.
They are online. Confirmed? Yes, the reason I'm asking this is that it is important that we begin to behave in the program way, that everybody involved in this value chain participates in these very important meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, as I go back to the prepared statement, there is one saying that I was given yesterday. I was given a very rude awakening by an investor who came to our office. In the beginning, I thought he was just shouting. But by the time he finished, I felt very inadequate as the national planner of this country. He asked me a very important question. What is wealth creation without markets? In the beginning, I thought I had the answer. But by the time we finished our discussion, I quickly realized that without market, we have no wealth creation. What we are doing is production and creating all sorts of problems. So as we go into this dialogue, two things must happen. One, that the little markets we make outside our income should be protected. Two, that the markets that the President, in his vision of Pan-Africanism and integration that he is creating for this country, should be exploited. It was a very interesting awakening, and after talking about that, I would even stop. It means to us that as we talk of creating wealth, the most important thing is going to be markets. So this dialogue cannot come at the most important time. This gentleman even asked me a question. Why are you giving away the market of maize? That you create your market of the farmers, and then you export maize to the neighboring countries who come back with feeds. I did not have a good answer. He went on to ask me another one. Why are you giving away our trade market? That Ugandans trade in China, but the moment the Chinese know that there is a demand, we allow the Chinese to import themselves. He told me, what wealth creation are you talking about? Today we are in-house, Ambassador Phil Pedro. That as we talk about wealth creation, we should go beyond production. We should be interrogating all government systems. It is only then that I realized that immigration was very important to our cause of wealth creation. Having worked there some time ago, I totally realized, who is giving the work permits to these people who are playing in the area that Ugandans should be playing? Should we allow in this country foreigners who are farmers at a small scale level? Or should we allow them only in large scale? Or should we allow them in areas where we have constraints of storage and value addition? So critically, as we discuss the competitiveness of in the regional agriculture trade, we must be serious about these markets. But at the same time, we must be serious about standards. The same gentleman told me, who told you standards start at the time of harvesting? Just a while ago, when we tried to register coffee farmers, we got a lot of problems, maybe a communication problem. Our intention was to know who the coffee farmer is. And then when we brought it in law, what we got was a good rebuttal. We've moved backwards. But then how will we know the farmers? How shall we have standards if we are going to compete in these markets without knowing who our farmers and who our players are? My director knows me for never using prepared statements. But I read these statements and pick the gist. I am thinking that if we come together, working as one Uganda, one government, where government means the private sector, means the public sector, and means the civil society, we will get far off. And I want to thank you again, because the National Planning Authority has the convening authority. We are one of the institutions in this country with convening authority. We can convene anybody in this country. One of our functions is for us to work with the private sector, civil society, to assess government performance. I think Ambassador Iskro, you note that that is one function NP has never played. And it is a failing on my part. But it's also important I talk about it as my contract ends. Maybe someone new will be able to take it on. It is critical that as we go forward in these forums, we will also bring in the civil society. And then we will create a framework on which to find good information, but also assess government performance. I think we can turn ourselves into that role and looking at what is agriculture doing about this. Are they doing it right? What is industry doing about this? After we plan, are they doing it right? What is the private sector doing? Are they doing it right? So I want to thank you and say come back again. The National Planning Authority through the director will be prepared to lead any dialogue that gives us information. Because as planners, listening is key. And as I finish, I want to implore you to the most important thing of the day, the way forward. I don't think it will just be important for us to sit here, talk, and then there's no way forward. We have been accused of talking, and doing nothing. So I am hoping that this dialogue will help us into refining the national budgets of the public sector. We are right now in the process of reviewing all budgets. And I want to thank our colleagues who have been so criticized when we started working together, that we can see changes, that now the Planning Authority is well consulted in writing the budget strategy, and that the Planning Authority is well consulted in checking all budgets of government. We will have all ourselves to blame. Dr. Glover, group. That is if I remain in this institution. If I don't, somebody else will also finish that. I want to thank you, and I hope that I will see you again. Inshallah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mubawala. I will now invite Honorable Victoria Sechoreko, who is online, to make her statement. Honorable Sechoreko, over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. All protocol observed, because I can't see who's there, but at least I know that National Planning Authority is there. So everybody is, to me, distinguished. First of all, I wish to extend a warm welcome to you all, the Uganda Dialogue, focusing on exploring Uganda's competitiveness in regional trade. I would like to express my utmost gratitude to our hosts, the Government of Uganda and National Planning Authority, for hosting this meeting. But not only hosting, but for fully participating in this meeting. And to all stakeholders, policymakers, regulators, business leaders, associations and development partners, as you have taken up time to be part of this meeting, public, private. I'm really excited, as this dialogue presents an opportunity for sector leaders from the various institutions with authority to make decisions, authority to allocate resources, or to influence action, to come together to reflect on the implications of various studies on Uganda's agriculture and trade competitiveness, and to commit to specific actions to place Uganda as a strategic leader in regional trade. This is fortunately the start of a journey to create a platform for continuous dialogue. But having looked at who is going to present the studies that have taken place, I don't think today I have to say. There are times when I attend meetings where we have experts, and then the politicians take so much time saying this and guessing the other. I'm not going to do that. We have got experts here. Today I'm just going to be a good listener. So today we will have presentations from the various studies that we are supported by our various partners, providing an opportunity to reflect on our country's competitiveness, followed by a public-private dialogue focusing on strategic actions and approaches. Really for me, my expectations, how I will know that this dialogue was worth its salt, is what happens after here. Like the previous speaker said, Uganda, we are good at talking, and quite often you will hear people telling you how we have good policies. Most people, I'm sorry to say, people who make that comment don't even know what the word policy means. Because for us who are in policy advocacy, there are so many missing policies, which I'm definitely sure will be brought out by this study. That is one. Two, there are so many hanging policies. To make a policy, to produce moments, and it ends there. So whoever is producing, there is a very good word in the book which I like these days. I will refer to say manager. It is we, the farmers, who are stuck with whatever is the problem. So I'm really happy that finally all these things are coming together. Therefore, I'm not going to take up any more time. I just want to listen to you experts, and together with you, I look forward to charting the way forward and also implementing the way forward. Because the one thing I will never give up on is advocating for good business. I thank you and I wish you good preparation.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Secretary. I hope you heard the clapping in the room. Seems everyone is so excited. We are also praying that you continue, you stay online, and I'm sure Dr. Muvala will also stay with us until the end to go through this presentation that Rachel is now going to make. I will not waste any time, but invite Rachel to come and give us the findings. Then we can discuss the findings afterwards. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Edward, and good morning to all distinguished guests present and to our participants online. Welcome. Before I go into the substance of the presentation, I'll invite my colleague, Mr. Edwin Odhiambo, to give some remarks about the partners that have come together to do this study, and then I will then take over and give the highlights of the various studies that we have undertaken. Over to you, Edwin, online.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and mine is going to be quick. I'm Edwin Odhiambo from Policy LINK program, and just to give a background, we are different partners. We are different partners that have been supporting this. So this is a joint effort of US government funded programs. When I say US government, I mean USAID and USDA funded programs that include Policy LINK, East Africa Market Systems, and Trade of Agriculture Safely and Efficiently in East Africa called TRASE program. And we've been working with the Uganda stakeholders to ensure that this meeting is successful. What we have done is that we are supporting this dialogue by availing evidence or analysis that would then inform the discussions and also enable you to identify what areas to focus on and what specific actions you need to take. And we hope to continue working with you beyond this dialogue so that at the end of the day we have specific actions that can be implemented to improve or enhance Uganda's competitiveness in the region. So what we are going to present, my colleague is going to present, is basically a synthesis of issues that we think are important for Uganda for this dialogue. But we do have those reports on the landing page, and you can be able to access those reports at your own time and be able to read them. I want to recognize the presence of USAID Uganda. We have Martin Fowler in the meeting, and also to note that these programs are supported by USAID East Africa, particularly Policy LINK, and EAMS is supported by USAID East Africa, and then we have TRASE being supported by USDA. So I want to recognize that, and back to you, Rachel, for the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Edwin, for those remarks. I will not waste any time, and I'll go straight into the presentation. So as Edwin has explained, we combined our knowledge. We had done some research independently. So rather than calling you separately, we decided to join forces and present issues together. So the presentation is basically going to talk about what these different studies found out. We were looking at determining critical factors that determine country trade competitiveness in regional agricultural trade, and also trying to identify some of the priority export-facing agriculture value chains for Uganda, while also considering the role of private sector in that endeavor. So the study was looking at also reviewing the agricultural trade trajectory and the impact of current policies and how those can drive trade in the region. And when we say region, we are referring to the East African region and the COMESA region at large. And of course, now we have the African Continental Free Trade Area on board. So when Dr. Mpawala was talking about markets, they're available. It's about how we tap into them. The presentation will take a three-pronged format. So I'll start with a little section on sector background and regional trade. This is information that most of you know and are familiar with, so I'll not dwell on it so much. Then we shall look at the findings from the Policy LINK study, and then combine that with also the findings that came out of the partner studies from TRASE and EAMS. And then thereafter, we shall pick out some of the priority issues that we thought were relevant for discussion today and to be taken forward after this dialogue. So the sector snapshot really is just letting us know that agriculture in Uganda is important to our economy. It contributes about 24% of our GDP and continues to do so, and there is a push by government to increase the role of agriculture in our development program. Then also as a government, and for people in the room, you know this better than I do, you have made priorities, you have planned, and you have emphasized certain programs that will be emphasized and implemented in the coming years. So some of the government priorities that have been at least outlined from the strategy documents, including increasing commercialization of agriculture and production and improved farm organization, something that Dr. Mpawala alluded to in his remarks. Then there's also been a priority for development and enforcement of standards through regulation, certification, and enforcement of sanitary and phytosanitary standards, again alluded to in Mr. Mpawala's remarks. And then thirdly, also the promotion of Ugandan-made commodities and laying the groundwork for negotiating bilateral trade agreements with key markets that are of interest to Uganda. And then fourth, there is an emphasis on creating linkages with market actors and brokering trade negotiations and joint ventures where possible. And lastly, trade facilitation, which is key, including the establishment of free zones and introduction of export guarantee schemes, while strengthening the institutional framework to support export development. There are, of course, a number of institutions in the country that are tasked with delivering on these mandates, and NPA has the planning role. We have organizations like Uganda Investment Authority, the Uganda Export Promotion Board, the Ministry of Trade, among many others, the Ministry of Agriculture, and of course private sector all have a role to play. Okay, in terms of statistics, I hope this is visible to everybody on the screen, but we just wanted to give you a layout of, the products that are being produced in Uganda, in what volumes and what values. On the left, you can see that we have focused on products excluding coffee, given that coffee is not predominantly traded in the region. But for the key products, we have maize, we have sugar, we have cotton, we have beans, we have tea, among others, featuring at the top. Then in terms of total exports, in terms of value, we have coffee. This is, of course, going into the international market. We have sugar, maize, cocoa beans, flowers, hides and skins, fish, among others. So in terms of the findings from the Policy LINK study in particular, there were a number of key findings that we're presenting here that we would like to highlight. I'll go through some of them. There are about 2 slides on this. So first was looking at the regional trade patterns, and from this we were able to see that Uganda and Kenya are very dominant players in the region, and in terms of being key exporters to the region. Then in terms of top 5 regional exports, we have, that is looking at the COMESA region, we were looking at products like maize were emerging, vegetables and sugar, among others, being prominent, and milk. Leading export destinations that were coming out were, in terms of agricultural commodity, Uganda is among the top 3 export destinations for regional trade, so we are also receiving products from the region. At the same time, we are a leading exporter to South Sudan and among other countries, especially DR Congo, our neighbors. So we are contributing a lot to food security in the region by exporting significantly to these countries. Then also looking at production similarity index, and here really we're just trying to see who are we similar to in the region. And when we look at our production and export similarity in agricultural products, it's noted that Uganda and Tanzania, our neighbor, have a relatively high similarity. So we are producing similar products for some, and there is room there maybe to explore other products that we could export to Tanzania besides those that we both produce. And then in terms of highest export potential, the study found that when you have an assessment of the products with the highest trade expansion index, within the COMESA countries especially, Uganda has a high export potential in a number of different other products, for example, oils and resinoids, beverages, among others. Then we also looked at a trade similarity index, and this showed that there are similarities in the patterns of production and specialization, that there exists significant untapped export expansion potential within the region. Then looking at export expansion potential by sector, candidate commodities for Uganda to consider were identified as coffee. As I've mentioned, coffee is exported predominantly internationally, but there is room for it to be exported within the region, value-added coffee that is, cocoa, cottonseed, and freshwater fish and farmed fish, seed cotton cake, among others. Then in terms of intra-regional export commodities, we see an opportunity for Uganda to increase its intra-regional trade participation in areas such as coffee, freshwater fish, and others. Then in terms of trade economic growth and food security, we looked at potential value chains, but of course these are subject to discussion, and of course as a government there are prioritized value chains in the country, but we recognize that there is potential again in coffee, freshwater fish, and others. Then looking at good business practices, which are essential for competitiveness, we identified some gaps that would need to be addressed and probably are being addressed in some way or another, and that is investment in productive infrastructure, and of course a need for greater transparency of border processes and procedures. There has been good work done to make our borders more efficient, but there is still room to do a bit more. Then in terms of policy opportunities, we are looking at policies that would probably affect 3 key areas. and that is reducing or removal of trade costs, reduction of trade costs, removal of trade barriers, which I think many of us in the room are familiar with, and increasing in crop yields, so addressing issues linked to productivity. Then here, this is just a table that really reiterates what I've just presented before and highlighting those two policy areas that need some improvements. So I'll just continue. So as partners, we came together and looked at our different studies and what we had found, and we found, of course, there was significant alignment in the challenges that we had identified. So these are what we have picked. It's not an exhaustive list. It is a list of what we consider system-level constraints, and we have categorized them accordingly. So the first and probably one of the most important is SPS-related issues and linked to certification. Where you see green dots, we have highlighted these for extra attention, and where there is need for collaboration between private and public sector to unlock the challenges therein. So for SPS, we are looking at issues around gaps and weaknesses in the SPS institutional capacity, policy and regulations affecting export trade. Secondly, we have noted that there is a poor coordination mechanism and understanding of the mandates of various regulatory SPS institutions. We have different bodies doing different things, and this, of course, can create some confusion for private sector who are trying to comply. Then lastly, we have the issues around addressing non-tariff barriers that are mostly around standards and quality. We are all well aware that the ability of Uganda to produce the right quantities at the right standards continues to be a challenge in the region. Then secondly, we are looking at the issues that we would categorize as being trade facilitation related. We have low productivity at farm level and inability to meet export quality and quantities in a consistent manner. We also noted the dominance of informal trade across most commodities. We have a high incidence of small-scale cross-border traders who are trading largely in agricultural commodities. So there is need to bring this sector more into the formal. Then we also have a high cost of doing business within the country, which of course impedes competitiveness. We had mentioned, and Dr. Mvaula had mentioned issues around packaging and quality and handling and labeling. All of these are costs that the private sector incurs, making our products a little less competitive in the region. Then we also have the need to tap into regional and continental trade. Uganda has been very active in the EAC, in COMESA, in the CFTA negotiations, and there is a need for us to translate those market opportunities into opportunities for private sector to make money. So these agreements should not remain on paper, and I know the government is keen to push expansion into these various markets. And then lastly, under this, we have limited information on how to harness actually these regional trade opportunities. So from speaking to private sector, we have found out that they find it difficult to access market information or market intelligence. Even information on regulations is difficult to get. It is scattered, it's in different entities. So again, here there is need to do more to make it easier for private sector to access this information. And then we also looked at issues that we would say are within the mandate of private sector to take the lead. Not everything needs to be government driven. So here we looked at the low level of private sector awareness about standards and SPS. So they themselves need to take an initiative to understand and meet public sector halfway. So this one requires both parties to be equally involved. Then we also have limited participation and involvement of the private sector in policy formulation, hence the dialogue we're having today. We have some private sector players that might get a little bit more involved, but on the whole, they are not actively engaged, and rather they are consumers of policy rather than contributors. Then lastly, we have a limited level of public-private partnerships for increased regional trade. This, I think, has already been alluded to by Dr. Mvaula in his remarks, so we need to bridge that gap between public and private sector. When government goes ahead to negotiate for markets, private sector should not be far behind, and the Ministry of Trade is very well aware of this. And then the second last, we have issues around policy. So here we identified the need for increased public sector effort to create a more enabling environment. This has been mentioned over and over again in the years past. It's not a new issue. And it's good to hear that NPA and others are willing to take on this role and increase participation of the private sector. Then we also sometimes have seen that there are competing national and regional priorities. We make commitments at the region, however we come home and we have other competing needs, and this of course affects how we trade fairly within the region. And again, this leads to issues around non-tariff barriers that again we have seen resurfacing in the EAC region in the last few years. Third to that, we have of course the ad hoc, or should I say ad hoc or unexpected and unpredictable export and import bans. I will not go into the details of that. I think we are all well aware these are becoming more and more common. And they, of course, at the end of the day are affecting the producer, those people who are not able then to take their product to the expected market that they would have been producing for. Then we also have issues around fiscal policy resulting in increased taxes and levies that are predominant. And this, of course, contributes to the high costs of doing business, and of course in that respect erodes competitiveness. And then also there is a need, there is a lack of policies to guide a shift towards a more formal economy. I've already mentioned the small scale traders, that we see a lot of the need to bring that part of our economy into the formal. And then lastly, on infrastructure, which I know our government participants here are well aware of, there is limited availability and access to storage, warehousing and pack houses, and production zones. We have persistent issues in transport and logistics. Again, a high contributor to our trade costs. We're a land, what are we called? A land-linked country. We no longer call it landlocked, land-linked. And within that, of course, transport and logistics becomes critical for us to be competitive in the region. And then lastly, we have a low level of adoption of innovative technologies and that can drive and improve efficiencies. Again, here, this calls for private sector to probably take the lead, to innovate, to find ways to produce more efficiently and more cheaply. Then after this, we looked at what is happening at the moment. What are we all doing in our different capacities that could help to answer some of these questions? I'll not go through all of these in great detail, but just to give a highlight, and this can be discussed further during the plenary dialogue session. So on SPS, we have, as I've mentioned, we have my colleague Martha here from the TRASE project, and they're an SPS-focused project. And they will be working on issues around targeting current and potential exporters and improving risk management approaches in the food inspection and certification systems to be able to meet importing country requirements. And this will be done through capacity building. Then the TRASE project and the East Africa Market Systems activity will be working together to work with SPS committees, not just the one in Uganda, but across the region, to strengthen private sector participation and also create awareness for the private sector about SPS requirements and how they can participate in the formulation of these measures, but also address any SPS-related NTBs that are emerging. Then in terms of issues around food safety laboratories, the TRASE program will be working on issues around building the capacity of laboratory analysts. This is ongoing work right now, has already started, and these are targeting both the government laboratories and the private laboratories. And then there will also be efforts to work towards ensuring alignment of test methods with international standards. In the area of plant health, we are all very much familiar with the issue around pests. So the projects will be working on issues around improving pest surveillance systems, early warning, and establishing national plans for surveillance and emergency response whenever needed. In terms of animal feed regulatory framework, there is a push to put in place a national feed policy and a legal framework to prescribe feed and feed additives. I think there was a mention about how we are exporting our maize only to import feed, so there's maybe work to be done around that. And lastly, FMD risk-based surveillance approaches between Uganda and Tanzania that is based on an existing memorandum of understanding. Then under trade facilitation, there are about 8. I'll just go through a few. We, as the East Africa Market Systems activity, want to promote the adoption of technologies that are available within the region, You need not create everything yourself. You can also import and scale. Those are technologies already available in the region. For example, hermetic bags, working on storage facilities, and warehousing. Then access to finance is always critical for agricultural competitiveness. There will be work around investment and finance for the larger aggregators in the region who are collecting what is being produced by the smaller producers, and partnering those with fintechs and financial service providers. Then again here we're working on issues around SPS adoption, so facilitating good practices, both at regulatory and facility levels. Then extension support, this is something that I'm aware that Uganda is quite passionate about and is making strides to make improvements here with things like the new parish development model, which is coming into play to reach those at the lowest point in the country. Then addressing issues around trade bottlenecks, we would aim to facilitate some innovative solutions to agriculture export, and also encourage some continuous stakeholder engagement. And then, of course, in terms of increasing the ease of doing business, that is something that, of course, that is involves many partners in the country, not just the two projects that are sitting here today, but there are a number of other development partners and government agencies working on this. Then for trade facilitation tools, we recognize that there's been a significant amount of work done in Uganda, especially the building of one-stop border posts that are making our borders a bit more efficient. We have things like the Uganda Electronic Single Window, adoption of the Trade Information Portal, all aimed at reducing time and cost, and these were funded and executed by Trademark East Africa in partnership with the Ministry of Trade and other partners in Uganda. Then in terms of private sector, what would we aim to do? So we want to work on creating some business linkages, especially working with large aggregators and downstream value chain actors in our priority value chains. So as East African Market Systems activity, we have 4 key value chains we are focusing on, that is horticulture, cereals, pulses, and livestock. Then we also want to work on issues around value chain coordination, working with exporters to promote increased organization within the value chain and increase scale and efficiency. Then largely the last and probably one of the most important is the policy advocacy capacity building that we plan to do. We intend to work with private sector organizations and business membership organizations to at least enhance their capacity to engage in the policy space, to advocate and influence reform, and not just influencing reform, but also pushing for better implementation of the policies that we do have in place. Because it's not always about a lack of policy. There are some good policies, but implementation gaps still remain. And of course, we want to encourage increased and continuous private-public sector dialogue like we're having today. So we don't expect this kind of forum to end today, but to continue even after the projects have stopped working. And then lastly, on policy, we're looking at issues around trade barriers. So facilitating the promotion of supportive policies and tax regimes. Also looking at increasing issues around crop yields, so promotion of technology, adoption and innovation along agricultural value chains. And then of course, again, removal of cross-border trade barriers. We've talked about this already. This is looking at both the technical side, business management and enterprise skills development. How do you help private sector be more aware of what is required for them to cross the border? And of course, tapping into the existing export promotion policies and strategies in place in Uganda. And lastly, issues around reduction of trade costs. This is something that private sector continuously complains about. So strengthening the logistics and framework in the country, working with those logistics players, and then facilitating measures for investment in productive infrastructure where possible. So with that, I will stop with the presentation on what we have found. I hand over back to Edward, and we're looking forward to really hearing from yourselves here in the room and the participants that are attending online. Over to you, Edward.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I bring on board everybody, I want to recognize the presence of Mr. Joseph Enim, the Commissioner from the Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Timbo, who is also joining us from the Ministry of Agriculture. I wanted you, Rachel or Martha, to throw more light, because some of the areas you touched were really high level. They're really good for ministers. But for these people here, they may need some specifications. I know the report has broader specifications, but maybe, Martha, are there some examples you can pick up out on these big highlights that we can now go on? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. First, thank you, Rachel. That was quite a very good overview. But I want also to thank the Planning Authority and the other government officials, especially from the Ministry of Finance. I mean, we work in development and we work with partners. I work for USAID, United States Department of Agriculture, who is the Ministry of Agriculture, and all the expertise on SPS matters lie there. So often they come with a little bit of money, and when the money comes, they have their own interests, but we know also that the region and the countries have their own priorities. So we tailor it to the priorities of the country. And sometimes when we meet you, we are happy, because then we see that some of the challenges we also face in development, we can tackle them together and see that we achieve our objectives and goals of these programs. So the program that I'm leading right now in the East African community is on sanitary and phytosanitary matters and standards which constrain intra-regional trade within the ESC, that are stopping ESC trade flows and also stopping the ESC from being a competitive trade bloc in this multilateral trading system. So we started off with an assessment, and our assessment was very, very practical. We are a team of regional experts who are so familiar with regional integration and country priorities. We worked at national level, regional level. So we bring that experience, understanding, and passion in solving issues in the country, in our countries, facing our countries. So we looked at very specific trade flows. What are the SPS issues constraining our trade regionally and internationally? And what are the possible solutions that can resolve some of these outstanding issues and unlock the trade potential? What we have put online is quite comprehensive, but also very broad. But let me just give specific examples. Say, for example, I'll give the one that the executive director talked about on the maize grain, the flow of maize grain, from Uganda, Tanzania, and into Kenya. Kenya is a net importing country. Uganda and Tanzania are net exporting countries. We found that regionally there is a standard which was agreed. It's a regional standard for trading maize grain within the countries. And by the way, Kenya understands the trade game very well. And even when their issue is very much political, they are solving a political, a domestic political issue, they will always raise a legitimate issue and put it in your face and say, this is why we are placing restrictions. So they trade using that standard. But when we come at national level in our assessments, we find that what Uganda and Tanzania have done, they have a national standard. They have domesticated. They have a national standard, and it is even some parts of that standard which touch on food safety are actually imported in the legislation. So there is a legal framework. And we also find that there is a quality infrastructure. Some labs are equipped. They do have good equipment that can do analysis, and not one lab. There are probably about 5 labs that can competently conduct mycotoxin analysis. But then what is the issue? The issue is in the letter that Kenya wrote to Uganda, clearly saying that we know you have the standard, but we have no guarantees from Uganda government that the grain they are placing on the market is safe. The guarantees are in that when the regional standard says conformity assessment, and when international trade says we want guarantees, all they want to say is, we know problems can happen, but we want to know that a problem is tackled immediately. It happens. So they want a system. They want to see that you have a system, a quality management system, that is identifying issues and resolving them as they arise. No one expects a perfect system, that there will never be contaminated grain. But the thing is, we know grain can be contaminated at any point in the chain from production, but what is the action whenever there is an issue? So it requires a system that is implemented from production to the market. But who can invest in that system? Government does not have all the resources. So it's a call now to government to work collaboratively with the private sector. When you go down to industry, you find that they have already put in place some systems which are aligned with international standards. They have quality management systems in there. I have visited some of the facilities, very smart systems, which are even certified internationally by some of the most, the companies out there which do third-party certifications. But the system stops at their facility. It doesn't go down to the aggregation point. It doesn't go down because they are also constrained. This is a requirement that requires government to work with private sector. So government should be able to map out the system and say this is where we stop and this is where you start. Say, for example, registration of aggregators, registration of farmer groups. He talked about registration of coffee farmers, and when everybody, yes, people didn't understand. It's very important when you're putting in place a system, you work with those participating in the system, and they know why you are doing registration of aggregators and farmer groups. They know it's part of a quality management system that's allowing them to participate in regional trade and even in international trade. And that system is inspection, testing, and certification. It has 3 components. So in terms of testing, the labs, you find Bureau of Standards saying we are the ones who do the testing. And what do? It's our jurisdiction. We shall test all the grain coming out of Uganda going to Kenya. Can they do that? First of all, it's very bad practice, regulatory practice. Not even in Europe where we take our products, we do 100% inspections at the borders. So why are you doing inspection at the borders? Because they have not put in place a system which provides guarantees, where industry is participating and where industry reports and data can be relied on to do some more risk-based regulatory approaches and say that we know through the registration of this company and all the farmer groups, there is data behind borders and they can trade safely because it's been verified, working collaboratively. It becomes very easy, very efficient, and trade facilitating. And you remove the border testing, which is absolutely unnecessary. So you now find a backlog of consignments at the border waiting for Bureau of Standards to do something for which they have no capacity. And then there are other labs, private labs. We have a very comprehensive laboratory training program right now, and we are trying to get the labs in country to work together and designate responsibility. Why do you have a private lab that has bench space and is not using that bench space, and you are not giving them work to do, designating responsibility, because you feel you are a regulatory lab, and you can't do that amount of work. So there is enough resources, but what we find lacking is a plan with strong government buy-in, so that the little resources coming from development are only catalytic, and the government is putting resources where they know they are leveraging private sector, and they are only doing what they must do, and private sector is doing the rest. But if it's not well informed and not well planned, everybody becomes reluctant to play a part. When we come in with what we think are solutions, because they may not be the solutions, we need to engage. What do we find? We find a ministry which knows what to do, the technocrats, but they will tell you we don't have money. And being frank here, because this is my country, they will say we don't have money. So you have a little bit of money to help do a solution, and they want you to fund allowances in the field, they want to fund fuel, they want to fund. And then when you're putting the budget before the partner says, this is not serious. And then you know, it's a challenge. So me, I'm thinking that without going too far, the solutions are not rocket science. They are there. But what is lacking is mobilization. And I was so inspired by Executive Director, and I hope he stays on. He said his term is ending. I hope his contract is renewed. Because he said some things which are very important. He said a program approach, and that's very critical. Why do we have resources in the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Trade, and then when there is a solution, we are all working together deploying resources to resolve that problem. And why is it that the Ministry of Finance receives fragmented requests? Ministry of Trade requests, Ministry of Agriculture, and to solve a problem on maize grain as if it's rocket science. Why can't we as stakeholders say, this is, and even in our own partners, I've been engaging USAID, Martin Fowler is here, I've been saying, the Ministry of Agriculture, USDA has this solution, thinks they can pilot this solution. You have many IPs with money for the same solution. Why are we not sitting together and taking one solution to the ministry? And they listened and said, bring all the IPs together, let's go with one voice to the ministry, so that the solution will pool our resources. So we would think that government could also, if the government did the same, would have a solution for maize grain. And it would be not just regional markets, but also international markets. We are doing the same with horticulture. We found the same problem. The region is so connected. So our work is in all the countries. So we are trying to see how do these SPS systems become connected so that they're seamless, so that if there are any issues arising, they are tackled immediately, timely manner. National SPS committees came from the ESC SPS protocol. What are they supposed to do? To mobilize the voices at national level, to implement together solutions that will support trade. What do we see? You have a national SPS committee sitting in the Ministry of Trade. When do they meet? As and when. Not when, not periodically, not with an agenda that's helping Uganda's trade. So how can we help the National SPS Committee to be the voice for private sector and government to work together to implement solutions and resolve any issues that arise? We are trying to do that, but we find that there is no leadership that is saying the National SPS Committee should be constituted this way, should move this way. We go to the Ministry of Agriculture, we discuss a solution. When we go back, they call us and say, we found another partner who is helping in this problem. We don't need your support. So we sit back. The other partner is talking to agriculture, not talking to trade. And you need to see where are we heading, really. It's a simple, simple thing. If you want to follow a program approach, and you have the NPA here, let them convene all the stakeholders and say, National SPS Committee is a public-private sector partnership. Who are the key private sector? They're here. What are the issues? We can do the analytical work, put the issues there, help set up the secretarial agenda, so that the little money coming from the Americans sets the things moving, but the country invests its own resources to resolve these issues. Because in the end, even our industry competitiveness will not happen. These issues touch on production, touch on trade of raw products, but industry competitiveness is even more complicated. In other countries, from one maize product, they have 30 value-added products. How do they get there? It's through product development, innovation, and science, and SPS all integrated. But if we can't even use this science to inform our own trade in raw commodities, how would we ever get to the science of product development and product competitiveness? Running around innovations in universities, innovations in the private sector, and getting the industry to move. So I'm so happy that Ministry of Finance is here, so we can start thinking, bring us to the table, say all the partners working on these issues, come here, let's find a solution. We draw a matrix, who's responsible, would we support here, would we support there, so that we help the country to move forward. I'm so sad that I'm speaking so passionately.
I'm going to stop you there, Master, for now. I want to bring in, you know, now we have both the public and the private sector, both in the room and also online. But I don't know who I should start with you, Ambassador. Do these things that Rachel and Martha have talked about passionately resonate with you?
I was looking at my friend here.
I could see wanted to jump.
We are talking about if these ladies were boxers, we were going to sign technical knockout. Because I think, my brother, you had to speak our hand. From the private sector view, you have spoken brilliantly. And it will waste time for me to say yes and yes and yes, etc., 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 because this is what we were going to speak. Actually, we are saying there is no country without the joint hands of private sector and public sector working together. It can't work. What you have just said is the national strength building of how the private sector and the public sector should work. Because if one thinks the other is the one and the other one is not, this is rubbish. The public sector does its part, the private sector does its part. Whenever one is injured, you should sit down to discuss. Is it a public sector problem? If it is, how do we help? Is it a private sector problem? If it is, how do we help? That's what the country does. Coordination, consultations, discussions, data and facts to make sure that we know exactly where the problem is caused and what are the optional solutions, and we sit down and try them. When one fails, you go together. But the question of blame game or abandonment or this is, it's what's killing our country. So what you have spoken, and I'm very glad I really came for this, is really what the private sector is yearning for. For the public sector to where it is strong, give issues of either policy or technical support or whatever it is in the private sector. Now where the private sector is strong, and there are many areas, like in the breweries. The breweries is bigger in itself, in this sector than government. You find Madhuvani in sugar, it is bigger and more competent than government. But when you have small farmers, government technical people are necessary because these guys may not know the latest technologies. So it's really the mix, to know where the mix is. Because the truth is you can't stop trade because the ecologies of countries are different. And so the efficiency with which products are made will always be different, and therefore there must always be trade. And so nobody can say there will not be any trade. Any trade that is being blocked is because of government policy. Otherwise, America can't grow coffee. Last year, but one Uganda produced 5.3 million tons of vegetables and fruits. Which Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania can't produce. And it was taken. It went into the rituals. And it was consumed locally. This is FAO data, and it's also available. Uganda produces much more milk. Who has stopped it? And why can't we negotiate it? Because this is possible. It is a matter of discussing the profit sharing agreement between the Kenyan traders and us. So the Kenyan traders and farmers don't like it. But we have never worked closely to find out how we can agree. So this is a problem bigger than the private sector, but it can always be negotiated. It should not stop. Because it's terrible to waste resources for our farmers who are broke, then there's no milk that is going across. Why? Kenya imports 1.5 million, no, consumes 1.5 million animals a year for meat. That's why there's cattle investing in Karamoja, because the cattle is stolen and sent to the Mombasa, Nairobi abattoirs to augment, because it is cheaper to do cattle ready. This again is something that we can work on. But it involves the public sector and the private sector sitting together to resolve these particular issues. Again, last year, Uganda produced almost 1 billion eggs from 50 million birds. Kenya, which has been a big producer before, has been overtaken by Uganda because of the cheap food. All right, so Kenya is 34 million birds with much less eggs. So Uganda can export, and we do. But again, we get some roadblocks because of quality, because of interest, and this is public sector to negotiate. We haven't really resolved that. Now, having said that, my main problem now is also government has been insisting on regional trade only in terms of maize. This is not correct. You better start breaking away from maize and seeing other opportunities. In fact, our last investigations have concluded that maize or coffee or tea, which is one crop out of thousands of plants, you might even make more money without growing them, but to extract chemicals from the wild plants and to make chemical industries to export it. This is really what we are looking at, at OWC. Why do we grow this when you can grow into the forest and bring in wild plants and extract them for chemical use into the region? So, in other words, what I am saying here now, and you just completely disrupted my speech because you spoke what I wanted to say. But I'm so happy with it that I want to say, number one, is lack of public sector and private sector always going in when there is a failure in one, and to agree on how to handle it. And secondly, once this is agreed, we should know that the regional market in East Africa is so small for the Ugandan capacity that we must start thinking of where we can export. Because if this Uganda start really producing seriously, the Middle East market, the Asian market, the traditional market of Europe, and the new African middle class market is a better market, much bigger than the regional market. And this cannot be where we are restricted to only maize. If you look at the whole of Africa 2 years ago, we imported about $48 billion of food, many other varieties. And the biggest consumption now of even our exports is Sudan. I remember Uganda used to export $900 million to Sudan, South Sudan alone. But this stopped because of the war. So we really need to go over what you have written, which I think summarizes all the problems of Uganda on the public and private sector. I don't want to waste time going on to that. You have done a brilliant job, and we need to now know how to execute it. I want to put a little bit of a kick, because I think government has been slow in accepting private sector. They have always said private sector is small. I don't understand what's going on. Because the banks are private sector.
And weak.
And weak, I can say, so that if they strengthen it,
Yeah.
it is okay. Because it is not small, but it is not as organized as government. This is true. But there is that misconception. Everywhere I go, top government officials always think middle. But today, the government has borrowed 10 trillion shillings from the banks. Savings of the private sector. Now, how can you say somebody who lends you is weak? Maybe weaker than he should be, but this is a misnomer we need to remove. But we are not saying that, because private sector is also disorganized. It's true, not disorganized. It can be stronger. Can be much, much stronger. And I think we pay 80% of the government tax. This is what we are doing, which government expenditure, which means that government has credibly worked from 35% to 80% money from the private sector to pay its bills. Good. But the government could have earned 150% more if it did certain practices. The practices you have said. And that's all we're expecting from government in the private sector. I'm repeating myself, but I really am so happy with your contribution, Chairman. I don't think I need to say much. Maybe we'll talk with the others. Because we need, all my view is, we need to see how we can now implement what you have discussed. I think today...
Yeah, but you see, Ambassador, you have complained a lot. But your first statement was about national strength building.
Yes.
You have not
I've not
touched how? Because you're making Mr. Enyim's work very difficult.
No,
just
I want
whinging
to,
about what they haven't done.
And my brother from agriculture,
Yeah.
to have more dialogue like this. Because without this dialogue, you can't start.
Yeah.
The dialogue has been very rare and very weak. I remember about 30 years ago, when we first went to agriculture, the commissioner, one of the commissioners said, no, you can't discuss policy. This is government. And I looked at this man and said, my friend, do you know government is a representation of the people and it is not in isolation? When you say policy, what are you talking about saying that policy is an issue of government? In the end, it is a summation of so many issues which government takes charge of. So this is where I want Mr. Enyim and my brother to agree that first, dialogue with the private sector, because government does not produce anything, it has no capacity to produce anything. But it can mobilize production once the market is available. And the market is big. Madam, you know America is a big producer of food, but it is the second biggest importer of food in the world. $131 billion a year. China is big, but again it is another producer, biggest, it's now the world's biggest importer of food. $134 billion a year. Europe, the Middle East. So we have a market. And we have to mobilize our people for these markets. Because the Middle East is the biggest importer of vegetables, fruits, and cereals. And it is very near here. Besides the East African issue, my issue here is Uganda is much bigger than East African market. It can supply the whole of East Africa if it is mobilized anymore. And I say this more seriously because you find, for purpose of clarity, Israel, which is only 20,000 square kilometers of land, and that is 60% desert. So arable land is only 8,000 square kilometers. Yet they export enough food and vegetables for 40 million people.
Yes. So can I stop you there briefly? I have a program where our policy people will speak, but colleagues from policy allow me to get as much feedback from the audience. Then you will come in last, if that is okay with you, Mr. Timbo, Mr. Newman, Director. So let me come to you, Robert. What do you have to add? What is your response? Because it's exciting from where I'm sitting. But what's your response to what is being shared so far? Then I'm sorry, before you come in, I will also encourage colleagues online. I'll bring you in, I think, Bijoy from Pearl Dairy, one of our biggest exporters of dairy products. I will bring you in after Robert. As talk, so you prepare yourself. But any other, Mr. Huda, I will also bring you in. So Robert, you go first. Bijoy will be next, and then Mohammed Huda, you'll be next. So Robert.
Thank you, Edward. My name is Mwende Robert. I'm a trader and processor, and I'm the vice chairman of the Grain Council of Uganda. You ladies, I want to stand up and dance when you are making your presentations, especially my sister, Martha. You were passionately speaking about what you are struggling with. For quite a while, I will talk about my sector. We had been orphaned. To date, we are not so sure whether we belong to agriculture or whether we belong to trade. We are still struggling with that. But that aside, I can say, are we really competitive in terms of what? If you come to right from production throughout up to the markets, Dr. Mbala said that it would not make a lot of sense if you are doing production without markets. As in the private sector, I think we've done our part, and we are still trying. By 2012, I can tell you storage capacity in this country was, I think, about 500,000 tons. Us, as the Grain Council, our members have borrowed left, right, and center. We have upped storage up to over 1 million tons, making it more than that. But now, you look at what we go through to get to where we are. We are talking of standards, we are talking of markets, but how is government coming to support production? The losses we experience in production, they don't come at my level where I process and trade. They come right from production, from the poor farmers. Now, I want to appreciate, by the way, government. through the Ministry of Agriculture. They are trying. But I think they are too stretched. Where is inspection? Where are the extension services? Because this poor farmer doesn't really know, or he may know, but they are also stretched. Now, however much I may try, I may not have much to do at the processing level to improve on the level of aflatoxins, etc., etc. I want to be a little bit fast because whatever I had prepared has been discussed by these noble ladies. When you look at production, I've just returned from the Greater North. And this is the statement I made, that I think many of us are in Kampala, sleeping, competing over nothing, politicking, but people are investing heavily. We went on a guided tour with Stanbic Bank, and members, I was with my chairman, Mr. Chris Kaijuka, but I was in Promo. I met a gentleman, he's of Asian origin. His family is in UK, but he's opening up close to, I think, 15,000 worth of acreage for rice. Now this man is saying, I'm doing all this, but where is the financing? The money I use is very, very expensive. And this is one of the cries that we have. We are borrowing at commercial rates. And banks have, I want to say this with all the respect, they have, I think, a misconceived notion that agriculture is high risk, whereas it is not. I think there has been some laziness in finding out data about this. And allow me also to talk about data. How do you mitigate the challenges we have without data? If you go to agriculture and ask them that what is the expected harvest in terms of yield as per maize, they will say, they will give you probable figures. I'm saying this with all the due respect, my brother. If you went to UBOS, that data is not there. If you went to URA, it's not there. No one has come out to say that I think we need to build a data bank. I'm talking about my sector. We also at the Brain Council, building this is a challenge because building a data sort of bank is incredibly expensive. We may not be able to raise it. Now, we are planning for this country, but do we have figures that we are using? Do we have projections? Now, we are talking of markets. What are we telling these markets? Do we really tell them that in the next harvest, we have grown so much, and this is the expected harvest? We don't have that. Many of the losses we talk about, they are just probable figures. We are not sure. What am I talking about? I think the time is now to work together in the so-called cherished PPP to ensure that we are all having a strong movement to score in one goal. Now, when you talk about markets, my sister there talked about the structured market in Kenya. I can tell you that if you drove a truck today with grade number 1, you will not be able to drive it beyond Busia or Malawi. They will make it very, very difficult. And then you are also aware that they are blaming us processors and traders that we export chakula ya kuku. But then we need to understand that these people come and buy this chakula ya kuku themselves. They bypass the processors, and some of them are bought right from the farm before it is even harvested. Now, what am I talking about? I think this is where a good policy has to be put in place, where we say that we are not talking about discouraging informal trade per se, but now let us have some measures in place. Because
This may not be supported data, but it is said our trade is about 80% informal and probably 20% formal. Now, how are we set in this PPP to transform from 80 and maybe informal becomes 20? Because we are losing a lot. I'm a poultry farmer as well. I'm a processor. But you find that most of the time, the so-called good feeds that I give my birds is imported. Why? Because someone has come, they take out the grain, and then they add value and sell the finished products back. I think something is certainly not okay. When you get to standards, we have the Kenya Bureau of Standards, you have the Tanzania Bureau of Standards, you have the Uganda Bureau of Standards. I will tell you, we have to harmonize the way we work. Why? Because we had a scenario where I wanted to import to Kenya. You get maize, take samples to the Bureau, and they give you a report. You find that the maize is now fit for export.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bijoy. I am the General Manager of Pearl Dairy Farms. Our brand name is Nacho. I am also a Chairman of Uganda Dairy Process Association, and today I would like to make some comments on the capacity of Uganda as a Chairman of Uganda Dairy Process Association. I would like to thank you for organizing this call. I believe this is strategically important for the country for the reasons I will touch in about a few minutes. Before I comment, I have a complaint to make. I believe the first speaker was Rachel, I believe. And she missed an important sector in her presentation, which is the dairy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I would wish to inform you all that in 2019, Uganda dairy sector gave Uganda a title which no other sector so far have given to Uganda. That is, in 2019, Uganda became the largest dairy exporter in the entire continent of Africa, overstepping South Africa. That was in 2019. We became the largest dairy exporter in the entire continent of Africa. In South African case, what happens is that they have in and out. They buy powder from New Zealand, Australia. They pack it and then resell it. So if you take the net proposition, Uganda became the largest, and I believe that is a commendable performance considering where the sector began from, especially in terms of accessing the international markets. Now, what happened subsequently was something drastic, and for that reason, I would wish to, for that reason, this call is very important, and you will understand why that is. From $150 million in 2019, our dairy exports, Uganda dairy exports, came down to a level of 15 million in 2020, and as of now, we are, I believe we are at around 40 million or so. Now, what does that mean? In 2 years, we lost, Uganda lost $200 million in terms of dairy export earnings. What is the real impact? The real impact is our farmers lost about 540 billion shilling in the last 2 years. Now, we are all here to talk about our competitiveness, isn't it? If you really think about it, from a private sector perspective, how a sector achieves competitiveness is very simple. It's like a baby, when a baby is born, we don't ask the baby, like approach, you go and run 10,000 meters marathon and come back, right? We look after the baby. We look after the baby, give proper food, proper education, proper guidance. At a certain stage, we tell the baby to run, right? Similarly, if we don't look after the agricultural sector as of now, what will happen? Now remember, 78% of our population is below 30. Now I believe somebody is from, somebody is here from National Planning Authority. I missed the introduction, my apologies, so I'm not sure who all are present. That means 36 million people, roughly 46 million is our population. 36 million people are below 30. Of our population, about 72.44% of the working population, that is roughly about 18 or 19 million, works in agriculture. Now, our NDP3 says we need to increase the household income of Ugandans, isn't it? The NDP3, that is what it says. The question is, that is a strategic document that we have. How do we achieve it? We achieve it by looking after the agricultural sector in a way we look after a newborn baby. If not, what will happen? Simple. Our youngsters will move away. I'm sure you are aware about this. Our youngsters will move away from the structure, from the agriculture. Why they are moving away from the agriculture? Because they do not find it commercially viable, or they do not find it to generate enough income to look after the family, right? If they move away from the sector, do we have another sector which can give large enough employment? I'm talking about 25 million people. Do we have another sector? As far as I know, we don't. So from a country, from a strategic perspective, which is rightly pointed out by NTB3, agricultural sector is the way to go. Now, as I said, how do we look after the agriculture? So we can sit and talk about structures and extension services and storage facility and all that. Yes, that is all required. I'm not saying it is not required. But remember, we are at the development stage, right? How do we develop that from an agriculture when we move to industrialized economy, and from there we get to the service economy? The only way to develop agriculture is to get into industrialized proposition, or as our president always say, move from subsistence to commercial farming. Now, how do we get there? We get there with collaboration of private sector, and that's the only way to go. We can argue it many ways, but that is the reality. That's the only way to go. Now, in conjunction with private sector, if we concentrate on industrialization in terms of value addition, in terms of quality products, make sure that the impediments the sector faces is gone away within a relative shorter period of time. By that, what I mean, our sector lost, our Ugandan processors lost $200 million in terms of earnings, as I said. Now, where is that coming from? It is coming from the trade barriers that we are facing. It is 2 years now. Tanzania has got a levy of 2,000 Tanzanian shilling for every kilo of milk crossing the border. 2,000 Tanzanian shilling is equivalent to $1. Now, is it commercially viable? No. Our other neighbor, for many reasons, nobody knows what the reason is, so at least from our perspective, but says we don't have, we are not giving access to your product. Not only us, not only dairy products, all, significant sectors. You take sugar, you take maize, you take chicken. Talking about chicken, I wish to borrow a few lines from Honorable Dixon's from one of the conferences. What he said was very interesting. One day old chick come from Kenya. The feed comes from Kenya. Ugandan farmer buy one day old chick from Kenya, feed the chicken feed which is coming from Kenya, and then try to sell the product back into Kenya. They say no. How does that work? It won't work. So basically, my proposition is very simple. There has to be a significant collaboration between the government and the players in the agricultural field who have invested in the country in terms of value addition. Talking about value addition, that is something which we need to be very careful about, and we needs to be very stern about also. See, right now what happens is majority of our products are going away from the country as raw material. We cannot sustain it. Why? In 39 years' time, Uganda is going to have 101 million people. 101 million people. That is the projected population Uganda is going to have. Although because of God's blessing, we have the fertile land to feed about 200 million people. That is according to the World Food Program. You can Google it and find out. So we have the potential, but the potential is not fully achieved because of the lack of looking after our baby, who is supposed to look after the family when he or she is grown up. So my submission to the committee right now is that, as you have rightly pointed out, agriculture sector is the way to go, purely because that is where the employment lies, purely because our population is relatively young. They are going to explode in about 15 years of time. You probably hardly will find a gray hair on the street, I'm telling you. Now, if we do not find a commercial or a profitable venture for all these youngsters who are coming, we will struggle. With that, I submit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bijoy. That is another voice from the private sector. Very interesting, the example you've given on chicken, how we can buy the inputs and then the output is blocked. So we take all the risks to rear this chicken. We give, as I know, over 70% of the cost of raising a bird is in the feeds. So if I have spent 70% of my business in Kenya, and the little margin I would want to add, Kenya is saying, no, you cannot actually make that money off me. I think that is unfair. I don't know whether it is a political issue, whether it is a policy issue. The experts here should help us. And I also think that the presentation Martha made, and maybe Rachel made, and I think Martha added, does not talk about the politics between our countries and the economic diplomacy that we need to address. I don't know whether that is for this particular platform or for another platform, but Mr. Mohamed Huda, I think he's still the chairperson of the Agriculture Presidential Investors Round Table. Yes, yes. So I bring that political issue because I know you have the highest ear in this land. Not that I want to preempt your presentation, but let us also think about those politically motivated interventions or restrictions that kill our businesses. Can you please make your presentation, please?
Yes, good morning to all in protocol observed. I have a few comments, and I will start with the last one on the political implications to market access. This is not new to Uganda or to probably any other country. There are always going to be non-tariff barriers. There's always going to be some sort of informal protectionism, irrespective of WTO regulations or bilateral trade agreements. But the way I believe that we will be able to overcome these issues goes right to the heart of Rachel's presentation. And that is effectively to get our house in order vis-a-vis the rules of engagement. And those rules are to say, well, you know, there are certain standards that need to be adhered to, there are certain systems that need to be adhered to, and these need to be certified along the way. So I've always been a proponent, and I take Bijoy's presentation at heart, in that the private sector will always use profit to drive the industry. This is for sure. But if you look at what has affected the sectors on milk or on grain or even on export of fresh fruit and vegetables, always comes right back down to the issue of regulation or SPS. And at first I always thought, oh, no, profit is the driver. But if we don't have an enabling environment, and we don't have enforcement, and we don't have the empowerment to the farmers on training on what are these quality standards, we will never be able to enter the global or the regional or the Pan-African value chain. The second comment is on trade. We made these beautiful bilateral agreements, and the latest one being the African Free Trade Agreement. Now, this goes two ways. What it means is, yes, we're always saying to ourselves, well, we got to focus on export. We got to focus on entering the value chain. But similarly, other countries will be looking at dumping their agricultural produce into Uganda. If we don't get the competitiveness side up of it, together with the standards side up of it, and Rachel, one of the other things that I thought you forgot was the consistency side up on it, we will always be a secondary player to the global value chain or the regional or Pan-African value chain. So the issue here that I am referring to is we will end up getting produce that will come into Uganda, and then eventually supply, demand, and price will take over. And then you will see the real issue of the farmers, or the plight of the farmers, really at hand. So what Bijoy is saying is, look, we have these industries at a baby stage, at an infant stage, and if we do not give them the enabling environment or the skills in order to get competitive, we will just end up being a massive agricultural warehouse instead of an agricultural producer. So I implore everybody to look at this public and private partnership. It's a two-way street. We really need to get our house in order before we can say we are now ready to take on produce from other people's countries and produce going out. And with this, I summarize by saying, simply look at what all the other countries in the EAC are spending on regulation or on standards vis-a-vis government budgets. Now, I then take that further, and Rachel was saying, well, you know, we need to be a little bit more serious about this area in sanitary and phytosanitary. We need the Ministry of Finance involvement in it. One of the things I've noticed as the chair of PART, and we ended up advocating for some more money to go into the Ministry of Agriculture in the departments handling phytosanitary and sanitary areas, is often the amount of money budgeted by Ministry of Finance and sent to the Ministry of Agriculture isn't exact for that specific purpose, doesn't really go into that department, which now tells me that, hey, are we really serious about trade? So I ask in this dialogue, number one, is please look at a cross comparison of what the other EAC countries are spending on standards, regulation, enabling environment. Number two, do a budget versus actual from what the Ministry of Finance allocated for sanitary and phytosanitary issues, and see the little money that we spent, did it go for these activities? And then we will turn around and be able to say, okay, now that we've got our house in order, how do we move to the next stage of productivity, enhancing productivity, and getting the issue of price, quality, and consistency to the market? Then we can say that we are players in the value chain. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huda. I want to come back to the room, but Anik, I can see you are online. And Martha here made a comment about laboratories. But as you prepare, I wanted you to come into the conversation because competitiveness without these facilities and infrastructure is a big challenge. I don't know how much lab space we have as a country to handle all sorts of areas. So someone can claim that your vaccine is fake, but then when you take them on, they have to run to London or South Africa. But I want to bring in Anita from Martha and Rachel, you have had so far. I want to bring in briefly, see if you can give me feedback or give any feedback on what is being discussed so far. Who wants to go first? Yeah, you can go first, yes.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you to the input we have received from the participants. In terms of some of the issues that are coming out strongly, we're hearing standards coming out very, very strongly. In terms of facilities, maybe the best that we can do, especially from the perspective of Martha and myself and our projects, of course the resources are not necessarily abundant to invest in laboratories, but the ones that we do have, can we make sure that they're functioning well? So of course, Martha has mentioned there is training going on to increase the capacity of some of these labs. But I think as Chemifa is coming on board, it would be great to hear from them, how they are integrating more into the system. Because we have UNDS, but of course they are constrained. I know they have some, they would hope to extend their services regionally. That has not yet materialized, but it is in plan. So even from their perspective, they want to be closer to the production regions in the country to facilitate testing. Because as we know right now, somebody has to move from whether it is in or testing, or alternatively, as Martha has said, they need some testing at the border. So it would be good to hear from the private labs how they can help bridge that gap. And what Martha mentioned, I think, was really important and needs to be stressed. How you can have that public-private partnership, especially there in that sector, because we do have some private labs. Some of them are already accredited. Can we use them more? So over to you, Martha, in case you have anything to add. In terms of, maybe before I hand over, in terms of the dialogue, we are keen to see that people are actually interested to have these conversations more and more. We will be happy to facilitate, of course, as East African Markets Project. We shall be trying to maybe go down now to a bit more of sector-specific issues when we have these dialogues. It's good to have these broader ones, but at a certain point, you need to have some of those that can unlock some of the more sector-specific issues. So we shall hopefully in future be able to maybe provide some small support towards those kinds of conversations between private sector and the necessary regulators, but at a sector level that are priority sectors. Over to you, Martha.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. Mr. Puda Mahmoud mentioned something very important. He said that on standards and SPS issues, he mentioned how they are a very important driver in terms of an enabling environment and us being able to trade competitively with other countries. I want Uganda to do one thing. Activate your national SPS committee. Activate your national TBT committee. And when I say activate, our programs are there to help, but we can't do it for the country. I mean, when I come, the ministry sees me as a foreigner, and I assert myself, I say, I'm a Ugandan, I'm also a stakeholder. And they look at me and say, still, we are government, you are an outsider. Some of the meetings, they lock me out. And I still assert myself. But I think if we have, we activate the National SPS Committee and we constitute it with the private sector and strengthen the voice of the private sector, we have done enough studies. There are another study I didn't bring here where we looked at the potential trade that Uganda is losing by not investing in SPS, certain SPS regulatory functions. Not everything. SPS is very broad. We looked at what are those specific interventions which if I do invest even $100,000, I'm going to unlock this amount of trade in millions of dollars. We did it on different value chains, together with the SCDF, which is a global fund. I mean, it was, but we had a conversation like this one and we disseminated and it ended there. But for me, I'm thinking we can have very focused conversations, and their program is there to facilitate that with the private sector and activate these committees and have their leadership. Let them not lie dormant in the ministries. Let them be activated and we use them to bring out these issues and to advocate, to go for certain reforms for the enabling environment, but also investments to plug where government really should be doing their part. And these investments are not much. I'm telling you, it's 50,000, 100,000. It's not much. It's so affordable. And the evidence is there, so let's use it. But I want to go to the question of labs and say sometimes it's overemphasized in terms of we need equipment, we need equipment. When we do our assessment, we find that the labs have equipment. In fact, they are huge elephants, but they are not optimizing them to broaden their scopes of work. So you find an exporter who wants a certain analysis will go to Europe, take that service, export it to Europe, because the lab has not gone through the process of getting accredited for that test. So what does it take to be accredited for that test? It's not much, it can be done, but there must be commitment from the lab. There must be champions there who say, we are going to do this for the tea sector, these are the tests, we are going to be accredited for those tests, this is how long it will take us to build our human resource, we need so much money from the government. And if you can't do it, use the private sector space. Chemifa is a private lab, they have space which is not utilized. If you can't do it, designate them. The laws allow you to designate and let them do this on behalf of government. So for me, I think there is scope to do these things, but let us have a forum, the National SPS Committee, to bring out these issues, find solutions, and do them together.
Thank you very much. Anik, are you ready to share? You have had what Martha had to share. Do your views differ from
Good morning.
us?
Good morning, everyone, and protocol observed. I'm very happy to be part of this meeting because it's fundamental. Industrialization of agriculture is key for the development of Uganda. And I thank you very much for raising the problem of the private laboratories and the lack of PPPs in the country, because this is the only way forward, according to me. I'm really happy to be able to give a brief comment about what is happening concerning the sector, of the private sector mainly. First of all, and I want this to be clear to all, Chemifa is not a European laboratory. It is not subsidized by anyone. It's private and independent and completely Ugandan. I'm the only one foreigner in that company. However, you have to know I've been in Uganda for more than 20 years, and I have my certificate of residence for 100 years in Uganda.
Congratulations! Yeah.
So, my question is here, where is the government going to find the money to function if it's killing its private sector by avoiding PPPs, avoiding discussions with its main partners, and competing with the private sector? Let public laboratories such as UNBS concentrate on its role of regulatory body and not go into commercial testing, and let the private laboratories perform their work of commercial testing and bring income to the country. Public laboratories are costing a lot of money to the government and are strangling private laboratories and thus depriving the country of important sources of income. UNBS is doing unfair competition to private laboratories because of the commercial testing they are performing. They tell everyone to bring their samples only to them because this way they will get their product certified. Besides, they are highly subsidized and thus proposes prices of analysis that the private sector cannot compete with. Given that they have the monopoly of the market, private laboratories are being killed and receive too few samples, and the prices of testing are too high. However, it is only if private laboratories receive a lot of samples that they will be able to reduce drastically their prices. You have to know that Chemifa has, over the years, 20 years now, developed capacity in testing so many Ugandan products, and Chemifa has the accreditation. For example, it's not only having the laboratory accredited for ISO 17025, it's also being accredited for the requested parameters. For example, Chemifa complete for testing fruits and vegetables, pesticides in fruits and vegetables, which is a very important factor for export to the entire world. It has developed 300 different parameters to help the private companies in the country. But our prices, I admit, are very high just because the price of analyzing one sample is too expensive for a private lab. For every private companies, it's all about volumes. So if UNBS keeps on receiving all these samples, Chemifa's prices are going to stay too high for the private sector. Besides, why are we only testing products that we export, leaving room for unsafe or health-damaging food on the local market? Let the government concentrate on its role to develop mechanisms and regulations and implement them. And let the private companies concentrate on its role of complying with the standards and regulations. Government should really work on PPPs and give more work to the private sector so that the economy of the entire country can be improved. As an example, recently Chemifa worked with MAIF to give training to farmers and traders on standards and provide advices on how to better apply the standards that will improve the quality of their products. These are actions that the private sector can do together with the ministries, only if ministries are enabling private sectors to do their work. You have to know that at the moment, Chemifa is really struggled because of the whole environment that is not enabling a major laboratory that helps in exporting the goods. So that is my contribution for now. Maybe you have questions to this, which I would like very much to answer. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Anik. I want now to bring in our policy people. I can hear huge competition between the government and the private sector. When you have borrowed heavily from our banks at 20%, the government is using taxpayers' money that would have done other things to do the same job that you're doing and kicks you out of business. But who do I start with? Manuel or Joseph? Who wants to go first? Agriculture, go first. Those machines are full. Speaker somewhere. Yeah. Let's speak loud.
I don't have a...
Yeah, thank you so much. Mr. Competitiveness, moderator.
You are the right person to be
And
here.
thanks
You
to
must give the mind and
our
give the
consultants for I convey apologies from my PS who had already committed this day for another meeting, so he couldn't make it. I think from the findings, it's just like I think a reminder to us that because most of these we already know. These challenges, these gaps, we already know, but this is largely, I think, a reminder to us. And as a Ministry of Agriculture, but of late, of course, we are talking now about program, the lead of the Agribusiness program. We are mindful and we are taking steps to ensure that the issues of market are adequately addressed. I heard from the Executive Director, he made a very big statement that how can we talk about wealth creation without handling the issues of market? And to me, I think this is very, very important. But also, we know at times it's very difficult to people always have challenge when it comes to disrupting the status quo. But I think it's important, and it's now that we need to disrupt the status quo. And this, what do I mean? That in the spirit of NDP 3, where we need to implement in the program approach, it is high time that we fast-tracked address the challenges that are impeding implementation of government programs, projects, and what other interventions in the program setting, because that's the only way we are going to address most of the gaps that have been identified, or that we already know that we have been reminded about this morning. So it's important that these issues, where we are violated, why doesn't agriculture work closely with means of trade? I think all that was clearly, or it is well articulated in the National Development Plan 3, and in particular in the Agribusiness program, which is led by the Minister of Agriculture. We had, the last 2 weeks, we had a retreat, ministry retreat, top policy management, and we discussed a number of issues. And of course, we are looking at, when you look at these challenges here, we are looking at the whole value chain, where we are talking about the very basic of enterprise selection, which will enhance our first pillar in the program of enhancing production and productivity, which enterprises our farmers engaging in if we want to increase production and productivity. Because among the challenges talked about not having sustainable supply of raw materials as one of the factors. We talked comprehensively about the agro-processing and value addition, which also has a bearing on the market. Also, when I'm talking about the external market. We talked about post-service handling and storage. All these have factors that hinder or affect our markets. And finally, the market itself. We talked about the markets. What is coming up is not different from what we highlighted as a factor that we need to address. And when you go to the area that have been identified of SPS certification, trade facilitation, private sector role, the policy and infrastructure. All this, from what we covered from that retreat, are adequately covered under the intervention that we are proposing. But again, I would say these are not very new. And again, I would say that knowing what to do is one thing and doing it is another. We talked about not only the external, the regional market in this case, but we wanted to first ensure that the domestic market, charity begins at home. So before we talk about the external market, we needed to ensure that the local market gaps are adequately addressed. So, and you remember when we are designing the NDP3, at the beginning we talked about market penetration, and we wanted to first start with from within. From within, we are talking about, like for example, dairy products, export, and we are saying, why don't we first ensure that locally we can consume most of what is produced? The President has always said that these production figures we're talking about of 2.5 billion liters of milk is nothing. If we could promote milk consumption in schools and other institutions. So we talked about the issue of market identification, that is serious undertaking the market, and the price intelligence, the market segmentation, trying to put different levels, the compliance to market requirements, the issues of quality, quantity, and standards. We have a very serious gap when it comes to packaging and branding. Where you find with our products, however good they are, because they're not well branded, then they fetch very little compared to the poor ones that are imported. Talk about distribution and logistical infrastructure that we needed to the gaps that we needed to address under that area. Talk about promotion and then the risk mitigation aspects. So in this, we can see that the interventions, after identifying that we have always known this problem, and what, again, I think it was Ambassador Idro mentioned that what is lacking now is how are we doing it? How are we going to do all this that we're proposing? And we took time and exhaustively discussed these areas. The how is where we have a challenge, implementation challenges. We see that we need to develop standards for export of agricultural products and encourage value addition. This has been mentioned. There is the issue of traceability. So where we need to establish traceability systems, we need to know where these products are coming from. That's why when we're talking about this coffee bill, which is becoming very unpopular, people are asking, why this, why that? But the issue is we need to know where is this coffee coming from. The consumers of these products are very much interested in this information. We need to strengthen the accreditation of laboratories for exports. The former speakers talked about, Kemifa talked about the laboratory, and of course the moderators talked about the competition between the public and private sector in this. But as a country, we need to have to strengthen the accreditation of laboratories for exports to ensure that what we're exporting is of quality and meets the international or regional market requirements. We need to establish packaging plants that meets industrial international standards. You know, this is some of the things that we take lightly, but they impact and they're affecting our exports, our markets. Branding, packaging, that we don't have a standard packaging plant in this country that would help us to package our products better. And of course, we can't leave out the support to cottage industries with skills and knowledge when it comes to packaging. You see, mostly we focus on these big or large-scale industries and not considering these small-scale or the cottage. And most of what we import here, by the way, come from these small industries, and you talk about countries like China or Germany, these small industries that really export a lot to most of our countries. So I would say that in summary that the findings here are very good findings. The ministry, which is leading the organization program, has already taken time to think through what needs to be done when it comes to market and market involvement. That is not only talking about selling, but also developing market for what is not already on the market. To us, I think, as we are saying, we need more engagement, the dialogue we are talking about, which in this case, you are highlighting that needs to be done at the sector level. We would request that it ceases to be sector, but let it now be addressed at the program level. So when we are planning to have this dialogue, let it be now organization program. That's that we have in the same room. We have trade, we have Minister of Water, we have Minister of Local Government. And that now, again, we seem to be embracing the spirit of the program approach to planning, budgeting, implementation, and reporting. Mr. Moderator, for now, I would like to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I was perturbed when you said you know what to do. I mean, these things are not new.
Yeah.
But up to now, we are still suffering as a country when you guys know. And of course, you then say the question is how we deliver it. What, in your opinion, is standing in the way? Now that we know what we know, what is standing in the way? What can we do? What are you going to do as the Minister of Agriculture? And perhaps I can put the same question to the private sector. That what can the private sector do to address these issues? Because what I'm hearing here is that the problem is known, but how we get there is, the strategy is not there. But we also have a strategy. This man prepared the National Development Plan and prepared the Implementation Action Plan, which I think is a strategy. But where could be the problem so we can move faster? That is one question. The second question is that, as we know, Uganda is a subsistence-led, especially agriculture is subsistence-led, that we produce for our tumbo, and whatever we cannot eat, either it is rotten or we sell. And the buyer just comes to our farms. But it is also evident that that subsistence mindset or practice is actually elevated at the macro level. That as a country, we eat what we eat, and whatever we can't eat, maybe the Kenyans come to our farms and buy straight to the farm and sell. At one time, Bobby's group was refused to send maize to Kenya, but they have Kenyan counterparts who are also coming to buy from us. We are selling their maize. What is the government of Uganda doing about this? Are we saying the mindset of government is similar to the mindset of the subsistence people you lead? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Katende. The first question about what needs to be done, seemingly we know most of what has been shared. What needs to be done? I think, as you have rightly mentioned, we have a strategy. For me, for now, I would call it forced marriage. The program approach, you know, and I said, disrupting the status quo. It takes time. It takes time. The thinking is sector. People still think sector. Now this is new, 1.5 years. in the National Development Plan 3. And what will change things is embracing the program approach, trying to address those challenges that we still have when it comes to the program approach planning. Because, for example, as agriculture, when we say for us, we are looking at the first segment of the value chain, enhancing production and productivity. When it comes to markets, they say, okay, means of trade will come in. It's marketing, that is now a docket of Minister of Finance, or Minister of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. And that's you lose it at that point. So until we have disrupted that status quo, starting to think more of the program and planning, like, okay, we are doing it now, the planning, we are trying to jointly plan, jointly budget, but it takes time. It is not a 1 or 2 year business, it might take longer, but that's one way that will solve this problem. The next one is, yes, subsistence production, true. We still have that big percentage, which now we're talking about 39 from 68. Export of raw materials, this has been, of course, an issue of concern has been raised here. The issue is the policy. Why do we have a policy in place in a liberalized economy, stopping the exportation of some of these that we export as raw materials, and in the end, again, you end up importing the finished products? So it's just having a policy. And all this is, we highlighted what needs to be done in that area to ensure that there is a policy in place to curb. But of course, with the challenges, because we know we are in a liberalized economy, challenges are there, but we need a policy to stop exportation or to regulate exportation of raw materials, more so grain, which is exported, and then in the end, we end up importing animal feeds and others, talk of cotton cake and sunflower and others. So that is just a requirement to have a policy in place to help us address this challenge.
Thank you. Joseph, you're head of policy, economic policy at the Ministry of Finance. You've had the big issues that actually speak to economic development here, which is private sector driven. And for me, I'm still crying for the government actually killing its own baby, the private sector. What is your take, and how can the Ministry of Finance, the custodians of our money, doing to help address some of the issues we have had today? Or what can we do going forward?
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, I'm glad just to be able to sit in the room and listen firsthand from the private sector players themselves. Frontline, put them like that. I think that some of the insights that have been shared are very instructive. And certainly I'm very keen to find out from you what your next steps to this process look like. I think that would add value to this in a manner that generates a yield for our citizens, but also us as players. I have some practical ideas that I'll put on the table after I have shared with you my reflections. So usually when your telephone freezes or your smart TV freezes, what do?
Switch on, you switch off.
You reset it. And talking about policy, I feel that the country currently is at a point of reset. You know, the discussion that has happened here, it's like, we know these things, but you're saying there's no change, you know. It feels somewhat of a time for reset. And I think there are a number of parameters that point to that end. In 1991, we put out what they call a public enterprise reform and divestiture policy, which essentially guided our privatization process. That policy was given teeth through the PAD Act. And I was looking at a draft report by the IFC. Uganda, within the East Africa, has the least or the smallest size of the public enterprise sector. If you look at our neighbors, Kenya, you know, Tanzania, Ethiopia, the public enterprise sector is very, very large. So if you score Uganda in terms of private sector space, you know, regionally, it's a high flyer. Yeah. Okay? Where I see us right now, of course, NDP brought the whole idea of a quasi-market approach. And we are seeing a revived appetite for government to play in this commercial space, public enterprises in the commercial space. And that's why I feel that we are at a point of reset. How I trust that this type of conversation could speak to the ongoing exercise of rationalization of government agencies. If we can distill out some of these pertinent issues, you take out these private sector voices, because, you know, when this rationalization is ongoing, you know, civil servants are not the best spokespersons for changes for or against. We are really looking for where do we lose value, where do we generate value. So I hope that we can package something here for that exercise. Now, listening to the conversation that has happened, my takeaways are very simple, but I think they are pertinent. What I hear is the whole issue of whether we are keen to take on informality, really, as a society, you know? Are we ready to make those decisions regarding formalizing our players? NDP provides us with the framework, certainly there. It talks about area-based statistics. Yep. Yep. Of course, we have the community information system, which has been taken on board by the parish model. Administrative statistics and land registration, for example. So they are just certain basics, like in my LC1, you know, I don't think we have a register, a residence register. So in my national ID, I have these particulars, but it doesn't tie me to a geographical location. And how do we foster responsibility? We have this adage that what you cannot measure, you are not going to be able to manage it. So just basic statistics for formalization, for me, is very essential moving forward. The second thing, of course, is institutional models. The debate here, whether you have UNBS as the regulator and maybe the apex referral institution for this issue of quality standards. In terms of market efficiency, it's a plus. But you have also highlighted the issue of a very large informal economy. And you notice one of the issues we have been handling with our policymakers is the cost of these services. when you allow the market forces to play them out. They are very efficient, but what happens is that they also exclude a significant proportion of players. So is it a hybrid that we need, or what type of subsidy scheme can we work with these private players? And we're in the era of course, boo-boo. How much local content, when you look at the space of these laboratories, are we talking the local players in this, or are we willing to allow foreign players to come and set the standard, get the culture going, and then the competition picks up? So my thinking is that I want to move to my proposals on this. Certification, I think, is really the way to go as a way of pulling these players, professionalizing what it is that we do. A commitment to being an orderly and organized society. You know, it comes with a price. Order comes with a price. So I like the fact that NPA has led us through this process of at least setting up these programs, having the program working groups, and then the program implementation action plans. But as you'll appreciate, for the private sector, those processes and documents currently need to come alive. So my proposals are, how do we make these things come alive? Number one, from a macroeconomic management perspective, in the Ministry of Finance, we recently revived what we call a policy support instrument with the IMF. So IMF plays this role of giving a health check to us as managers of the economy. We agree on certain structural benchmarks or even service benchmarks. So my thinking is, since we have this programmatic framework, why don't we institute an instrument that maybe we can call a program, support instrument? And what it will do is take a conversation like this, distill the issues, transform them into benchmarks and say, the agro-industrialization program, the planning authority is going to handhold you to deliver on these benchmarks. In 2 years' time, we need X, Y, Z resolved. Okay? And then you just have what you may call an annual program scorecard, around which, because the idea really is performance-based management. If you take our programs right now, I know we prepare the PAPs, we get resources, we have the GAPA process there, but where is the price of not delivering on a benchmark? What are the consequences? So I'm just thinking of, let's make implementation of these programs business oriented. I like the fact that we have the PIRT. Could we at least bring it to the fore and say that, we engage the media and the players to scrutinize really how we are performing against these benchmarks? So for me, that would be one. The second one would be around, given the discussion on the table, is fast-tracking this issue of the Uganda Commodities Exchange. I think that it is a market mechanism that can provide for the requisite regulation, because when you start securitizing some of these undertakings, by defect you trigger certain requirements, like now warehousing, okay? You trigger certain standards domestically, that if you're going to use this commodity as collateral, it must meet the following benchmarks, okay? So I am aware the Capital Markets Authority is advanced in terms of the regulations to allow for USE to put this product out there. But it goes back to that issue of how ripe are we for being orderly and organized. The type of things I see here, they don't really take a lot of money. It's not an issue of money. There are areas where money is important, but if we straighten out this reset stage to say, what is our policy in terms of how much private space, how much of a private sector-led economy do we really want to build? If the public enterprises are to engage in the commercial space, for what purpose? Should we be having benchmarks for UDC, for example, to say, start up this enterprise, prop it up, off you list it. You know, it goes and runs so that its portfolio is not growing unendingly, but there's a way of disposing it to the private sector space. So those are my ideas and reflections. One of the takeaways I've had here really is to maybe look into our budget and see how we compare with other countries in terms of investment in regulation. I think that's a practical action that can generate a conversation. Thank you.
Now I want to pick up on one area which you have touched, the commodities exchange.
Yeah.
There is a very big obsession with it, but commodities exchange is probably the extreme end in structured trade. We have an East African commodities exchange in Uganda. Even before our problems with them, 80% of our maize was rejected at the exchange. And while SMA, CMA, Capital Markets Authority, and USAID are focusing on the system, which is like the digital system, the mechanisms required from an input from these guys here. What goes in the soil, how it is processed, how it is transported, how it is stored. Before now, somebody in London, somebody in Nairobi can sit in a commodities exchange is like. And I think a number of the conversations we are having here would be, for me, the prior actions needed for the exchange. To be honest, the exchange is a couple of years away, like 10 years, if we don't handle all the issues that Rachel, SPS, standard issues. Aflatoxin, we are yet to see many Ugandans dying of aflatoxin-related diseases. And as a country, we have failed to handle it head on. So even before we look outside the country, there are certain things we must do internally in Uganda to address those simple and doable things. Is it an issue of the budget? Is it an issue of the mindset? You know, we have an entire mindset change pillars, you know, in the parish development model. But is there a program, similar program for civil servants on the mindset change? Is it an issue of mindset? Is it an issue of budget? Is it an issue of laziness? What is it?
So let's take the innovation we see in the energy sector.
Yeah.
We used to have a very big problem with quack electricians. It was a big safety issue. But by working with the private sector and the regulator, just introducing that policy requirement, actually regulatory requirement, that if UMEME is going to connect power to your house, you need to demonstrate that that house has been wired by a certified electrician. Now, just that requirement was such a trigger for reorganization of what was formerly a very problematic segment of that sector. So I'm saying, for example, that we are now going to deliver on the parish development model. One of the key things that is on our heads as Minister of Finance is what are we going to do about the off-take capacity?
Yeah.
If you organize production there the way we have designed it, what is going to be the mechanism to guarantee a minimum threshold of offtake? So if we agree that one of the ways to do this is really to use our structured demand mechanism, then for me that will send a signal down the system, okay?
Yeah.
That if the commodities of a parish are to make it, you know, into this mechanism, you need to be able to work backwards as follows. But that decision has to be made to say, this is how we are going to deal with offtake capacity. And these are the ramifications or the implications down the system. Okay? So those, the triggers, if we focus on those triggers that can, you know, get the actors playing, because those people play by incentives, you know? So what are the triggers that will signal the right incentives? I don't think we have the capacity to police this whole system. No. It has to be triggering incentives, regimes, and by incentives we're not talking about tax incentives, and there is just behavior change that if you're going to compete, you know. So that's how I look at it, but it comes with a commitment to order, to say that if you are a farmer, if you don't meet X, Y, Z, we are not going to politic about it, you are going to incur a loss, okay? And then we facilitate that investment. So it's an issue of discipline and a commitment to the price of order.
Thank you, Joseph. Bob, you had a hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say a few things. You mentioned that at the moment we could be very far from commodity exchange.
Unless we address this.
Unless, exactly.
Yes.
You see, what happens is commodity exchange is next to impossible if we don't have warehouses.
Yeah.
I need to report that out of that storage that we have put in place, it's unfortunate we are operating at about 20%. Yes, if I have space worth of storage at about 5,000, what is 20% of that? If you went to around and conducted a very quick sample, you will realize that almost all processing equipment is silent. Why? And this again takes us back to competitiveness. What are the power tariffs? Because our tariffs are incredibly high, even right from installation. You go to whomever, you tell them I need power, they say, okay, do the following. Go get a contract after that. Now, after investing at my plant, I'm a case study. I invested $100,000. But they could not commission before I erected a fence. What does that mean? I have no access. I don't have any business with power. But then what happens is, after incurring all that, you'll find that the cost actually makes my price prohibitive. I cannot trade. My commodity will not be competitive. Yet our neighbors go through the same with very low power tariffs. What are the borrowing rates? I mentioned that. Am I able, one of the biggest reasons why our facilities are silent, we don't have money to buy.
But he put money in UTB for you. On the
My brother,
the trade facility, grain trade facility.
as a Christian, as a Christian, you know Jesus is about to come back. Truth be told, I don't think, and I highly doubt, any of my 120 members has ever received that money. We are borrowing not at development rates, but at commercial rates. And again, when you go to a bank, they want to finance contracts. Whereas we are dealing in seasonal commodities. By the time I go through the nitty-gritty, the season is ending.
It's gone.
So you give me money that I'm not going to use. And again, you find I may need a grace period, a grace time period to say, now I have borrowed this money, I need to do A, B, C, D. All of that is not put into consideration.
Now, having said that, we are supposed to do a number of things concurrently. I submit, Chairman. Thank you very much.
But
Joseph,
Mr.
you want to respond? Yes.
Mr. Moderator, you see, this is also an issue of wanting to have your cake and eat it at the same time. If you take like our energy sector now, it has won the Continental Award, I think thrice, the energy regulator, for doing a good job. The fact that in Uganda we are implementing a full cost, recovery tariff, we are saying that if we are to, of course I agree with you that where we are starting from, the price is high, and I want to believe that that is going to be a historical problem, given what decisive actions have been taken. But we cannot really bury our heads in the sand that once you support certification, regulation, inevitably that segment of the market comes with a certain premium, okay? And that's why sometimes people want to operate informally, because they want to undercut prices, okay? So to say that if we are going to be competitive internationally, we must at the same time be willing to price for quality. So I think that when we talk about mindset change, it goes beyond civil servants, it goes beyond those in the subsistence economy, even within the private sector. The commitment for professionalism and a quality code of business. So that's just my response on that matter.
Now, if we are coming towards the end, where I will invite Dr. Suman to lead us in the way forward. There's a team that has been putting together what they have, what they see as emerging solutions and way forward. And as that team shares what they have put together, I want to invite Dr. Birungi from Kilimo Trust to make your input. I think you have done quite a lot of work on this subject in the region. You have 3 minutes to make your case, and then I will hand over to Dr. Suman.
Thank you very much, Edward. Thank you to USAID and USDA for putting together this discussion. I must also applaud Joseph for being able to join us in these discussions. We haven't been seeing the Ministry of Finance actively participating with us in this event, so clearly the commitment is there, and we must applaud you for joining us in these discussions. I'd like to just make a contribution and a solution to what we have has been pre-shared by, I think it was Rachel and Martha and the previous speakers. And yes, Joseph, there is commitment to formalize from the private sector, and I'd like to give an example of what has been done in the past 3 years or so by Kilimo Trust, and a success story that can be built on by USAID and others. Key to it is critical and catalytic investments that must be made, and I want to say this in the beginning in terms of information and digitalization. We worked with the Agro-Processors Association of Kenya, which is a small-scale, has about 67 small-scale processors of maize in Kenya, and a network of producers and exporters in Uganda that is a platform to establish accountability and traceability among members. And what were we trading in? What were we supporting these traders in? It was maize and food trade. And we leveraged on a private-public sector steering committee. Members I can see are here. We have the Grain Council of Uganda on that committee. The Private Sector Foundation was there. Nathan Odoi, who is seated in the room there, was on that committee. The Ministry of Agriculture, Trade, Export Promotion Board, I can see them online. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, all those were on that steering committee and would meet once a month to address issues of regional trade. How did this work? How did this help? During COVID, there was a need to support maize farmer traders across borders. With limited movement, we took advantage of a WhatsApp group. And that is the kind of catalytic investment I'm saying we should look at, USAID should look at. Buyers would post their produce on this platform. Solicit for Uganda would say, I have this amount of maize in XX region. The buyer would say, I'm willing to buy that maize, post on the platform. Payment would be made through the Agro-Processors Association of Kenya account. Supply would be coordinated, and within 2 to 4 days, it would happen. Logistics and clearance was handled by the exporters, by the importers. But they were also on this platform. They were using and taking advantage of the information on that platform. What did we see? Over 15,000 metric tons of maize was exported between Uganda and Kenya. 70% of the maize exported between December and March. We are tracking numbers here, passed after toxin tests, purely because of traceability mechanisms that had been enforced by these members. And these are kind of mechanisms that are self-regulatory mechanisms that have been put in place by these private sector actors. But we faced challenges, and these challenges were, for instance, a truck moves from Kasese, moves all the way with maize, gets to the border, and it is told it needs a certificate of conformity, a form that it should have gotten from Kasese, but there is no office to get that form from. It was not clear. Information on how to get that form was not clear. And so what happens? Ministry of Trade or commissioner is called, because they are on the platform, the steering committee platform that we had created, and they were able to intervene in this situation. URA was brought on board. So what I would like to conclude, very, very important, we need reliable information at every point in this ecosystem for trade to happen, whether it is domestic trade, whether it is regional trade. And investments should be made to digitize and scale out platforms that have worked well, so that we don't have instances of a truck driver moving from one point of the country to another without knowing what was needed if they could access this information on a digital platform. So that's my contribution, and I really want to applaud you, the Agribusiness Alliance and others for convening this meeting, and I'm willing to share more experiences on regional trade and how we have engaged with the public and private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beronji. I want now us to go into the final part, but before we do that, I want to ask Emmanuel and Joseph to make just one departing shot, because I'm not going to call you back. Is there anything that you really want to say before we leave?
I think from the perspective of the Minister of Finance, just two issues that we are keen to advance collaboration that is geared towards raising productivity in the agricultural sector, so that is at the farm level. And then the other one, of course, from a public finance management point of view, is a return on public investment. So we welcome from you inputs in terms of insights or ideas around how we can take the 1 trillion or so that the program currently receives and improve its return on investment. You know, we set out the Public Investment Management for Agro-Industrialization Strategy, PIMA, which we are continuing to track. So your feedback in terms of where you think the leakages are and where the linkages to be harnessed are. A couple of things have come out from here, I can attest to that. So that we keep this alive, maybe if we can get an update from you twice a year or so, you know, that would be useful for us to process. And the budgeting process is now started. It is a very opportune time to actually send in that priority list on how we can get a higher return from the same budget knowing that we are handling, of course, a situation of a COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
But there is something here that was mentioned, that the money that's allocated to agriculture eventually does not reach agriculture. They don't get the funds. When we work with them, the technocrats know what they are doing, but they always say they don't have funds.
You will get that across the country. Every ministry will tell you we are not well facilitated. But what his point is basically, can we get value for money? If you are the head of policy in a ministry like agriculture, what are you doing with the salary we pay?
Before you get anything.
Before you get consultants to come and write a policy for Uganda.
The scorecard one that I think.
But it's deeper than that, because the money may reach agriculture, but for me the bigger issue is that it's meant for extension, but instead it goes to administration. That's the bigger issue, because and that's within Ministry of Agriculture, because that will not sort out the problem. That even if you give agriculture a lot of money, and if it was meant, we use very good jargons to get the money, but once the money reaches base, it is used for something else. So that one for me is a bigger challenge. It's not more, if I'm to sort out this, that's the biggest thing we need to sort out. However little, if it meant to do this, we need to do what it was meant to do. That's.
But of course, this is a big topic we have discussed with finance. Allocation efficiency, utilization capacity, and many other issues come into play. But maybe in the future we can have a conversation on the budget, on the money.
But I think you will be glad to know that in terms of the budget strategy that was communicated, the issue of regulation and standards is very high on the agenda. So that's a source of comfort.
Emmanuel, without talking about the money, because they have brought up the issue of money. What is your part in short?
For me, my take from this is policy related to engagement, and the minister of course will work out more engagement in this line, because help us to pick up what we started as mentioned, and therefore open as was mentioned that there is a bit of now discussing. I talk about sectors that I propose the program so that we get more input, feedback, what we get so I don't think I have much to say beyond that.
Thank you. I will now go online where we have our team that has been rapporteuring. But also in the room here, we have Dr. Asuman's team that has also been doing some work. But let me start with Kudzai online to take us through what you have identified as the key emerging issues for next steps.
Thank you so much, Edward. My name is Kudzai Madzwanka from Policy LINK. I'll just highlight the strategic actions, but a number of issues also came up, specific issues relating to issues of diversification, value addition, information and data collection, standards, productivity, private sector investment in support services and laboratory, creating a culture and a mindset for enabling private sector and competition along those lines. But I'll focus more on the strategic level actions that we can take away from this meeting. The first key issue was strengthening or establishing a platform for multi-stakeholder engagement, which includes both public sector, the private sector, the research institutions, and also the partners, to develop strategies that can address some of the issues that I've highlighted. This includes jointly agreeing on how to address a number of issues. Key considerations also include issues of ensuring multiple ministries and collaboration amongst trade, agriculture, NPA, and others. Also a clear and a consistent and coordination amongst donors to support some of the initiatives. And I think one of the most important aspects was also ensuring that there is a strong private sector leadership to actually drive, probably even chair and host this platform to ensure sustainability and private sector-led investments, which we're also proposing within this meeting. And one of the issues also that came out was the issue of a budget allocation to support the implementation of the activities, considering or comparing with other country counterparts in the region. What are they also, how are they also supporting these various institutions, and what are they allocating to the ministries? There were also a number of actions related to SPS. Since today is also World Standards Day, there was quite a bit of focus on SPS, calling for greater collaboration among standards bureaus at regional level, but at national levels, issues to do with strengthening and activating the national SPS committees to facilitate dialogue, to also support private sector investment. Rachel, please go down. Also, other issues with respect to public-private sectors, public-private sector, number 5. Dialogue and consultation on specific issues of strengthening PPPs, the framework for PPPs, which is already existing in Uganda, particularly in the areas of laboratories for SPS issues, to ensure affordable testing services. There was also an issue to do with supporting private program approach by governments to move away from silos and sector approaches. I think this also speaks to the issues that we spoke about, agriculture, trade, related support institutions coming together and working together, using the same budget and similar strategies to actually address competitiveness and export market issues. The issue of the Uganda Commodities Exchange came out quite strongly, implementing it. And lastly, issues of strong monitoring and evaluation through benchmark performance management scorecards for key ministries to actually ensure and have a way of monitoring the implementation of some of the actions that have been planned for. So these are some of the strategic actions that came out of the dialogue, plus the specific issues that I've also raised earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kudzai. Anybody in the room that when you look at all these 8 areas, that there is something pertinent that we have omitted? Of course, we would have loved to focus on about 2 to 3, because if you have a long shopping list, but he's the director planning, so a number of these could actually go into his plans. So is there anything we have omitted?
Chair.
Yes.
I think that NPA should reflect around an index for the programmatic approach. We've adopted this approach, but who tells us at the end of the day which program is really achieving a programmatic approach? And then what are the parameters that we should be assessing these programs against so that they start paying attention to those areas, I believe it would help with solving the frustration that was emerging in the table.
Could then that be part of the program you guys are leading, the development plan implementation?
Exactly. It could be,
but as an action, we really need that.
Given that the programmatic approach is a major NDP3 shift,
yeah,
it is something that must be kept on the radar, yeah, in a measurable and verifiable way.
It should be part of your scorecard.
But what he's talking about is a bit even broader than the conversation we're having here today, because it's more about how you are going to deliver the entire NDP in terms of the new approach that you have taken. And you need to make sure that the new reforms you have taken are taking traction. So it's a very good idea, but as you, Chair, you put it, it's in terms of the DPI approach, because not only NPA, it is, you don't want to enter into a certain space, because in terms of coordinating, ensuring this programmatic approach is operating, indeed it's the Office of the Prime Minister that's in charge, but NPA has a role. In terms of the crafters of this, he has a role to make sure that it gives the right advice and hand-holding to make sure that the Office of Prime Minister takes this space. But it's a very good idea that we will have to pick up. Yeah?
He wants to add something.
Just to add, in terms of tracking the progress of the different programs, NDP3 has the results framework, which is supposed to measure on an annual basis the performance of each of these programs. So the results framework presents the measure for each of tracking the progress. But moderator, if I still have the flow, one of the things that came out was the underpaid facilitation was the issue of trade barriers, which was raised and said this should be addressed in all fronts, from the political, technical, and institutional fronts.
He's not.
Anything more you want to add? You wanted to add anything, Anna?
Yes, the emphasis on setting up national sanitary and phytosanitary committees for advocacy of creating an enabling environment.
That one has been covered.
That has been covered. The activation.
Protecting Uganda from dumping and an investment in the...
That is a very, very broad thing. How do you do it?
The way you see the report was captured also.
Sure. So, colleagues, that was what we had time for. I have been your...
moderator. I just also want to clarify. When Rachel was presenting on the findings, I think there was a misclassification of NTBs. For example, quality is not an NTB unless it is used as a disguise. Quality is a TBT issue.
No,
the
NTBs... You meant quality-related NTBs, not quality-related.
Yeah, but...
SBS related. We know they are legitimate non-tariff measures, but...
Yeah, but, okay, but what I mean is, for example, we also note that in the regional trade, there are a number of clear-cut NTBs like roadblocks, delays, bureaucratic tendencies, which also impact on the competitiveness of our regional trade. And finally, I saw also in the recommendation, they were making recommendations, but they didn't appear in the finding. I don't know whether the finding was so summarized. Because, for example, in our presentation, as constraint, there was nothing mentioned on extension, but in the findings, they were making proposals how to improve on the extension, agricultural extension subject.
I think as Dr. Suman prepares to close, after here we are definitely going to harmonize. These are studies by 3 institutions. and is voluminous. So I think what Rachel has done is a fantastic job to condense all that work into 15 minutes. But from here, we will continue the deliberations and ensure that we have identified those key issues that are killing us, and also solutions that are actually implemented. There is no need to come up with things that we know government of Uganda will never implement. You can just mention it, but you know it will never happen. So we also need to bear in mind that. But I don't want to keep people long. We are overshooting by 5 minutes, so I'm handing over to Dr. Suman. He can make concluding remarks and officially close the show, well, the meeting.
Edward, again, thank you very much. You have been a very wonderful moderator. And to the presenters, Rachel, thanks for that very insightful presentation. To my colleagues in the government, Mr. Chimboa and Joseph Enyimu, Commissioner, thank you very much for the insights that you have provided, and definitely to my colleagues from NPA and everybody else who has participated in this. For me, the one thing that I've learned as a planner is a planner, you quickly learn to listen. You quickly learn to learn and unlearn. You quickly learn to realize that you don't have a monopoly of knowledge. There are so many people who have a lot of knowledge out there. And because of that, you notice we were able to develop an NDP3. This NDP3's main aim is to make sure at the end of its period, at least majority of Ugandans are slightly aware of in terms of their welfare and incomes. And in this, the key program is particularly this agro-industrial program. And if you notice, we are not talking about agriculture as a sector, but we are talking agro-industrial because we are trying to unpack the entire value chain of agriculture. And that's where these trade issues become key.
Is it
because
on your website, NDP3?
Yes, it is on our website, but if you don't have it, I can even share a hard copy before you leave. I can even give you a soft copy before you leave, but it's on our website. But it is basically trying to unpack the entire value chain, because one thing we noticed from past efforts, that as government we have been good at doing things in silo. We don't connect the dots. And it's one of the things I'm hearing from this conversation, the need for us to be able to connect the dots. The other thing from NPA, where we haven't done a very good job, is that we are supposed to assess, to set up a framework where we liaise with the private sector, the civil society, and be able to assess government performance. And this way I want to tie this to this conversation we are having, is that going forward, this is an area we need to do better to make sure that as we did the NDP3, we need to partner with you, the private sector, the donor community, the civil society, the people who are in the trenches, to make sure that we assess government where we are not doing right, so that we inform policy direction. And on that front, I want to commit an NPA, because in NPA, one of the things that is happening very closely with my colleagues in finance is that we are driving the budget. When we worked very close on the strategy, and some of these conversations that inform these strategies. So we know what is missing, and it's out of this that in agriculture we are pushing more for certification, we are pushing more for the right quality of seeds, the trade issues, these issues are coming up. So these kind of conversations, they inform the way we are going to move as government, and what this is going to inform the way we operate. And therefore, on that front, I want to thank everybody for this dialogue. It shouldn't be a one-off. This dialogue should be a continuous dialogue that gives us those practical things that we can use quickly to be able to inform policy direction as government. I liked, Martha, a few things that you brought out, particularly the low-hanging fruit of making sure we activate SPS committee. I'm asking myself, why can't we do this? because it's not in this. If COVID has taught us anything, you no longer need people to meet the way we are meeting. We can set up an e-forum.
SPS is one of the most controversial policy issues,
Yeah.
because it's fragmented,
Yeah.
and maybe he can tell you more,
Yeah.
because there's so many, it's multi-sectoral, multi-departmental, and each one is claiming supremacy, so we need a real convening muscle to make sure.
And that's where NPA comes in. NPA and finance, that's where we come in. Because me as a planner and the person who crafted the NDP, my key role is to ensure that the NDP results are achieved. So meaning that it doesn't matter whether it is agriculture in charge, I'll write a letter and copy the president, and the agriculture won't receive their budget. It is that. So I need to flex my muscle. I can write to the president, the following minister is not doing A, B, C, D. So where we are moving now in terms of programmatic approach, that's the way we are moving. For those of you who are seeing the way my colleague put, there is a sort of a change environment happening. Currently, we are doing something on COVID testing at Entebbe, and NPA crafted this. They are the ones organizing everybody together. So meaning that convening role is, and that's why I want to rely on the private sector, to tell us what to do, and you allow us to do our job, to make sure that we convene the right people, to make sure that we if it means the budget, we convene. If it means a ministry is not happening, we try to bring them together. And this is an opportune time, now that we are talking about relevance of organizations. If an organization is not delivering, your likelihood of you staying in this dispensation where we're rationalizing becomes very key. So what I'm committing here is that I'm looking forward to the entire report. Okay. And looking for the low-hanging fruits, and we are going to interrogate this case by case, so that we look for a solution case by case. So that if it is SPS, you tell us you have been in the trenches, what are the issues, who is failing, because you know is failing this, then you allow me to do my role. You will see a few people. I know of late we are having a lot of powers, where we can, together with my colleague seated this side, we are having a lot of powers. We can call it anybody to attention, and they will come running if we want, because with him and the two colleagues on both my sides, if you hold the pass, everybody can sing to that pass. So now what we are doing in the government, that the budget is now closely aligned into the planning instruments, and if the planning instrument says SPS is what is failing us, the institutions that are supposed to get that money are not getting it, will be able to deliver. And in this whole thing, in line with the programmatic approach, I believe we are onto something that I want to commit, that as we look at each of these on a case-by-case basis, we'll get the right solutions. Lastly, again, I don't want this to be a one-off. I need us to formalize this dialogue, particularly in line with the NPA mandate, where, again, I told you is that we are supposed to liaise, coordinate with the private sector, civil society, to assess performance of government, most in particular where the missing links. So this dialogue comes in the right time, and it's a good platform for us to build on. So I believe that we should institutionalize this dialogue, so that moderator, let us have this maybe biannually, so that we pick a few things that are failing, particularly the agro-industrialization. It shouldn't be just on this. Let us look at the entire agro-industrialization. Where are the missing links? Then you allow us to look for the right people to make sure we take this forward. With those remarks, thank you very much again, and thank you. I'm looking forward to the final report to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Meeting adjourned.
You did a great job.
But when is the annual review of this program?